Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. We're back, and let's just get right back into this. I think that before I go on with the discussion about the changes in the tax law, I want to go back and cover another current events issue that's occurring. It's with the Federal Reserve Bank, of course, who just had the chairman, Jerome Powell, announce they're not going to lower interest rates. They're not going to give American Main Street access to capital. Now, if you think about this, it's pretty obvious this man is politicizing the agenda, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, if you'll recall last September or so, when inflation was running at 4.5%, still running over 4%, and he said he didn't really want to lower interest rates until it was back down around 2.4%, the marker that it was at before Biden took office. And you're looking for it to come back down. But at 4.5% with 3 months to go in the election and Joe Biden sinking fast, actually gone, and Kamala Harris stepping into a moribund economy that was bottom was dropping out because of inflation and expenses. And what did Powell do? He cut the interest rates an entire point, a whole point, 100 basis points. Not 25 like usual or 50 as occasion, but 100. Cut it a whole point to juice the economy to help the Democrats. So now, with inflation under Trump after 6 months, back down at 2.4%, the number he said he wanted to get to before cutting interest rates. Well, here we are. 2.4%. Price of oil is back down again. It jumped a little bit on Iran-Israel action, but not much. But here we are at 2.4%. So what did he say? No, he's not lowering the interest rate. It's going to stay right where it is. He's not going to give Main Street America access to capital. Only the institutions get access to the capital. So why won't he lower the interest rate? Is it just because he hates Donald Trump, which is absolutely true? But is that why? I don't think it is. I think there's an ulterior motive. You see, what happens in the next 13 months is $11 trillion. $11 trillion in national debt comes due and has to be refinanced. And the Federal Reserve Bank wants that $11 trillion refinanced at the highest interest rate possible. So he's not lowering interest rates because he wants Americans to suffer on the interest cost for borrowing. So he's going to leave the interest rate where it is so that the $11 trillion has to be financed at a substantially higher rate to cost the American people substantially more in indentured servitude and peonage slavery in service of the debt. Now he's the Federal Reserve Bank chairman refusing to lower interest rates so the American people will have to pay the Federal Reserve Bank more money. The greedy pigs. So that's the motivation. 11 trillion refinanced at a higher rate. Oh, it's only an extra trillion for the bank across 10 years. Who notices that now when we're at 40? Or about to be? This is a huge conflict of interest. It amounts to waging war, economic war, financial war on the American people. And of course, this has been an economic invader since 1913. Who took over control of America while it invaded the country and began raping the people with the income tax as it funded World War I and World War II to keep everybody okay with borrowing money to beat the Nazis or the Germans or the Kaiser. as they fund the German development of the war machines in parallel. So the Federal Reserve Bank has really become a pariah and a leech. It's time to go. This bank is a fraud. It's preying on the American people. It's working to effect a global rule that eliminates national sovereignty and lets the bankers and the institutional companies have total access to the natural resources to plunder out of poor markets and sell into wealthy ones while minimizing their production costs by stealing the natural resources and using slave labor to produce it, and then shipping it all to America to sell for pennies, undercutting our product prices, which is why Donald Trump has put tariffs in place on the places that are doing this to level the playing field, to lock them out and to give the American businesses and companies an opportunity to rebuild a manufacturing base and to be able to sell successfully into foreign markets that they've been locked out of since World War II. So, this is what's really going on at the Federal Reserve Bank. They're moving on taking over the world through economic control of all the different currencies, which of course are all inflating into worthlessness even faster than the US dollar is being printed into worthlessness by the bank and Congress with their absurd borrowing. This is all coming down to, will you need your own earnings to survive in the future environment? Yeah, you probably will. You're not going to be able to give 20, 30, 40% of what you earn to the government so they can be wealthy and fly in jets and have multiple homes and limousines and security protection all on your dime. Well, you get nothing back except crap and debt. Let's not forget the debt. They're certainly giving you lots of that back, aren't they? Now, the Federal Reserve Bank has become an economic invader that needs to be disposed of and removed. So the digital currency is showing up at just the right time because it opens the door to being able to do that. And that's the next step after eliminating the income tax. Because if you think they're preying on you now, wait until you see what they have in store when there's no more income tax to service the debt, to convince them that the debt is collateralized and therefore they should keep lending. No, the income tax has got to die, both corporate and personal. It doesn't work. It doesn't fund the government. It motivates the corporations to lie about their profits and use false accounting to eliminate them, and it places the entire burden, therefore, on the backs of labor, because when the corporate burden is shirked by corporate accounting, the burden must fall somewhere, and it goes straight to the backs of labor. And that has to end because, of course, what that is the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which reads a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find the taxation of income, is in the Communist Manifesto. It's not in the Constitution. That's where you find the graduated taxation of persons by income, or the graduated taxation of income of persons. That's the Communist Manifesto, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. The Constitution doesn't allow for the graduated taxation of citizens. Only corporations, foreigners, and licensed persons subject to impost duty and excises. All taxes on the American people have to be uniform, and the use of tax brackets is based on the power of Congress to discriminate against the commodities and articles of commerce subject to taxation by excise, and to discriminate against the inanimate corporate person, the privileged licensed person, and the privileged foreign person who is here. All of those parties can be discriminated against by Congress, but the American citizens cannot be discriminated against in Congress. And the use of geographical uniformity as an argument to allegedly justify the graduated taxation of the American people is nonsense. And that's what they've done, is substitute geographical uniformity for intrinsic uniformity, actual uniformity. And the problem, of course, with geographical uniformity, well, what geographical uniformity is it says it's okay to discriminate as long as the parties discriminated against are treated the same in each of the 50 states. So as long as the wealthy are all subject to the same federal tax rate in all 50 states, they can be taxed at a different rate than the poor in all 50 states. And that's perfectly okay because it's geographically uniform, and as long as it's geographically uniform across all 50 states, they can go ahead and discriminate. Now, what's wrong with this? Well, that hypothetical theory results in the conclusion that we could write one tax rate for Jews and another for Christians. We could write one tax rate for blacks and another for whites. We could write one tax rate for those of Italian descent and one for Irish, and another for Mexican. We could write different tax rates for the young, the old, the male, the female, the gay, the straight. And all of this discrimination in tax rate is perfectly okay as long as all the gays, Christians, straights, blacks, whites, wealthy, poor are treated the same in each of the 50 states, right? As long as we take 95% from every Jew and 5% from every Christian, the discrimination is okay because it's geographically uniform, right? Right? That's what it means. Right? Wrong. That's nonsense. Congress doesn't have the power to discriminate on religion or color or age or gender or sexual preference or wealth. Doesn't have the power to discriminate in law against the wealthy or the poor. And if you think they do, you'll get exactly what you got. A system where the wealthy don't pay any tax because they're subject to the 15% capital gains rate. And you pay tax at the 40% rate on every penny you make. If you let them buy different rates, you'll end up paying all of them. As the poor. The rich will buy the law, and the poor will be the ones discriminated against, while the wealthy are allowed to walk away basically tax-free. Don't believe me? Go ask Mitt Romney. He pays at a 13% rate. He's worth millions. So graduated tax brackets are unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional to not tax the poor and tax the wealthy at 40%. It's unconstitutional to have one rate for the middle class, one rate for the poor, the lower class, and one rate for the upper class. This is unconstitutional. It's straight up communism, which is based on the theory of dividing the population into different classes and setting them to warfare with one another. And then while the classes are constantly at warfare with one another in the streets, each side is constantly calling out to the federal government to assume more power, to intervene in and end the class warfare playing out in the streets that it engineered with the graduated tax brackets that applied different rates of tax and different laws to the different classes of persons defined by the statute. This was all written up as being unconstitutional in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust. And the government's been telling you, oh no, that got overturned by the 16th Amendment. That's a lie. Bruce Shaber was about indirect taxation. Pollock was about direct taxation. How do the two cases cancel each other out? How does one override the other? They're about entirely different constitutional subjects. Pollock is still in full force and effect. Direct taxes have to be apportioned to the states. And the 16th Amendment did not add a thing. Not one iota of new power is created. Not one new subject is created. Citizens didn't become subject to federal taxation because of the 16th Amendment. They're only subject to federal taxation if they engage in an activity, transaction, or in a place or event subject to impost, duty, or excise. Okay, I think I hear the second commercial break coming up here, so we'll be back in 5. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Stay tuned. We're going to talk more about the Moore decision in this final break here. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and I'm just going to get right back into it. As I was saying when the commercial break came up, I'm going to get back and talk more about the Supreme Court decision and more. But first, let's review what the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower courts have been doing since basically 1960, but in precedent in every single circuit in the country since 1980. What I have here is the IRS's frivolous tax arguments, the truth about frivolous tax arguments. It's the IRS's paper that the DOJ has been using for 45 years to assert that it's frivolous to argue the income tax is an indirect tax under Article 1, Section 8, and is not a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. So let's look at what they say. Now, right here, it's argument position number 6 under the constitutional amendment claims section of their frivolous positions document. And it's 6, contention. The 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned federal income tax on United States citizens. That's the contention that they label frivolous. And of course, it's exactly what the Supreme Court just ruled in Moore is true. So it's this frivolous positions document that is frivolous and treasonous, communistically treasonous, this fraudulent nonsense. They've been saying it's frivolous. Some assert that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned income tax, and thus U.S. citizens and residents are not subject to federal income tax laws. And that's absolutely correct. You're not subject. They've been lying to you. Here's what they say. The law. The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld when challenged. Now, how friggin' stupid is that? The 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld when challenged. Upheld as what? Part of the Constitution? What kind of idiot statement is this? Who writes this nonsense? Who writes this garbage? And then tries to feed it to America like it's gospel. The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld. What an idiot. And numerous courts have both implicitly and explicitly recognized that the 16th Amendment authorizes a non-apportioned direct income tax on United States citizens and that the federal tax laws as applied are valid. Well, now, since it turns out the first part of that sentence is a lie, the Supreme Court says the 16th Amendment does not authorize a non-apportioned direct tax. So since the first part of that sentence is a lie and is fraudulent and is not true, what do you think? You think the second part that says the federal tax laws as applied are valid? Do you think that's true too? Even though the first part of the sentence is false, do you still think the second part is true? Obviously it's not. If there's no direct tax, the laws are not valid as applied. They are 100% invalid, unconstitutional, and communistic. Not constitutional at all. And look at how many courts have said this. United States v. Collins in the 10th Circuit, Beckrith in the 9th Circuit, Lovell v. United States in the 7th, Broughton in the 8th, Hawkinsmith, that's not even in a circuit, Young in the 8th, Stearman v. Commissioner. It's a tax court memo. It's a tax court. Not even a court of law, but they're ruling on the constitutionality of the income tax. They won't touch law in any other case, but they managed to write this, didn't they? Oh, it's a direct non-apportioned tax. Lying frauds, communists, seditionists, undermining the government, destroying America, socializing America. That's the old version. The current version says exactly the same thing, but cites a bunch of new cases. Young v. Commissioner in the 8th, Talifaro v. Freeman in the 11th, R.E. Beckrith in the 9th, Lovell in the 7th, so on and so on. So every circuit in the country has declared it's a non-apportioned direct tax. Boy, I'll bet they were surprised when the Supreme Court wrote in Moore, it's an indirect tax under Article 1, Section 8. This should have been front page news all over the country. But this country is so ignorant, the legal industry is so stupid, moronic, and off base, they don't even know what it means. They don't even realize what's happened. They don't know what the IRS is arguing in court. They don't know what the DOJ is arguing in court. They don't know what the circuit judges are holding. They don't know that the IRS is telling people it's frivolous to claim it's not direct, and direct taxes apply to everything you do and cannot be avoided. So every penny you earn is subject to federal tax. Now think about that. What would the founding fathers have said to anyone who told them that every dollar earned by any person in any state in America was subject to federal tax? And that you couldn't make money in America without owing it to the federal government? Do you understand how vile and unconstitutional that concept is? It's absolutely inconceivable that under the Constitution, every dollar you earn, a piece of it is owed to the government. The 16th Amendment has been a lie since World War II. There is no authority. There is no enabling enforcement clause. The word direct isn't in the amendment. Congress isn't authorized to write law, so there can't be any new powers and there can't be any new persons subject to the tax. The only federal taxes allowed to touch the American people are imposts on foreign activity in foreign persons and in foreign places, duties on exported goods, and excises on ATF, commodities, licenses, and corporations. A privilege. It taxes privileges, not the right to work. So let's look at how the dominoes fall once this false foundation of a direct tax under the 16th Amendment without constitutional limitation is eliminated from the picture. The first domino to fall is that the income tax is not a non-apportioned direct tax without limitation under the 16th Amendment. Well, then if it's not a direct tax, the federal income tax is an indirect tax under authority of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 only authorizes taxation by impost, duty, or excise. There is no fourth category of taxes. It doesn't exist. To impose duty or excise, income isn't a type of tax. It's a way to measure the amount of impost, duty, or excise owed. But if there's no activity or transaction conducted at any place subject to an impost, duty, or excise, then there is nothing to measure with income. There is no tax. And your earnings derived from your right to work are not subject to impost, duty, or excise taxation unless they occur in a possession or a foreign country under tax treaty, which, of course, is where Section 61 originated in 1918, 5 years after the original law. And it only taxes sources of earnings earned in Canada, not America. There is no domestic taxation. They got away with that by lying to you about the direct tax under the 16th Amendment and then claiming it's on all earnings under Section 61. But under the Supreme Court decisions taken in Moore et al., 602 U.S. 572, 2024, the federal courts lack the subject matter jurisdiction, fatally lack the subject matter jurisdiction to enforce a non-apportioned direct tax on individuals. And that's the only thing the IRS has been assessing with its deficiencies, is a non-apportioned direct tax on all earnings that doesn't exist. But the next domino that falls is citizens are not persons made liable by statute for the payment of any tax. The only tax that statutes make a person liable for, the tax that they have collected from other persons. 1461, the withholding agent is liable for what he has collected from foreign persons. 3403, the employer is liable for what he collected from the employee. Nowhere is there a statutory liability in the name of the person who earned the money. It doesn't exist. They've had to make that up under Chevron and its regulatory deference by writing a regulation for Section 1, tax imposed, that says you're liable for the tax. But Section 1 doesn't say anything. The statute doesn't say anything about liability. It imposes a rate of tax. How are you liable for a rate of tax? You're not. That's why the statute doesn't contain it. That's why they had to make it up under Chevron to apply the direct power they invented under the 16th Amendment and unconstitutionally applied using gross income to all of your domestic earnings. But you're not liable. The only liability is there for the collector. The only other liability that you could possibly have is liability that was assessed on a tax return form. That's why they need you to voluntarily file. They can't enforce the tax against you unless they've got your signature on the liability. And of course, the labor of the American people, conducted by right within the 50 states, is not subject to indirect federal taxation by impost, duty, or excise. That's not an activity, transaction, event, or place where federal taxation is allowed. So there's no taxation of labor. And now there's no authority to file a return because, of course, 1040 isn't required. And there's no requirement to put on a 1040 earnings that aren't subject to federal tax by impost, duty, or excise. So your bank interest isn't taxable, your rent isn't taxable, your wages, your compensation, your interest, your annuities, your tips, your commissions, none of it is taxable because none of it is subject to impost, duty, or excise taxation. It's all been a fraud. It's all been made up to turn you into a slave to the Federal Reserve Bank, who wants you to pay another $1 trillion over the next 10 years at a higher interest rate to service the $37 trillion in debt your Congress has unconstitutionally run up and cast you into this indentured servitude system of peonage and involuntary debt service by keeping you ignorant about the true nature of the relationships, both between you and the law, you and your employer, you and your bank, the bank and the government. They've kept you ignorant of all of this in order to enslave you to their desires and greed. And they are destroying America while they do it. And yet they push on. Well, there's no gross income under Section 61 anymore. No one has gross income under Section 61. It's not subject to impost, duty, or excise. It defines the income of someone in Canada between 1918 and 1993 when the treaty expired. It doesn't even apply to the non-resident aliens who are subject to the tax. Their list of taxable items of sources of gross income is 1441B. That was the domestic legislation. Collect on sources of earnings of foreigners. They added Section 61 5 years later under a Canadian tax treaty where it applied until 1955, when it was recodified from Section 22A to Section 61 and interpreted by the Supreme Court as a statute taxing all accessions to wealth. How they figured that out from 1918, I will never know, but this is the same Supreme Court that gave you Social Security, the victory tax, Korematsu, where they locked up all the Japanese in the country, and then went on to give you Roe v. Wade, dividing the country, Chevron regulatory deference, Okay, so I think we've covered this. Graduated taxation and the income tax is unconstitutional. It's ending. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I'll be back next week with more about more. Yep, thank you.